Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Crystal Terrio. I will be your Master of Ceremonies for today's Journey to Peace Seminar number 2, 80th anniversary of the World War II Philippines campaign, with an emphasis on the Battle of Leyte Gulf. For those that attended our first session this past July, welcome back. Journey to Peace held our first session recounting the Pacific Campaign in the Mariana Islands from June to July 1944. We thank our audience and volunteers for their continued support. Today, we have the distinct honor of having the family of the Medal of Honor recipient, Captain Francis Wai, joining today's session. Will the Wai family please stand? Please give the Wai family a warm aloha and a round of applause. The story of local Hawaiian Francis Brown Wai begins with an infamous athletic career at the very elite Punahou High School, class of 1935. After graduating UCLA with a Bachelor of Science in Economics, Captain Francis Wai joined the Army on September 27, 1941. He was assigned to the 34th Infantry Regiment. After conducting missions across the southwestern Pacific, the 34th was assigned the task of landing at San Pedro Beach on Leyte Island, at the location known as Red Beach. It was at Red Beach that Captain Wai's heroism was recorded for posterity. According to the citation issued with the posthumous Distinguished Service Cross, later upgraded to the Medal of Honor awarded to Captain Wai. Captain Francis B. Wai distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism in action. In 20 October 1944, in Leyte, Philippines Islands, Captain Wai landed at Red Beach, Leyte, in the face of accurate, concentrated enemy fire from gun positions advantageously located in the palm groves bounded by submerged rice paddies, lying the first 4 waves of American soldiers, leaderless, disorganized, pinned down on the open beach. He immediately assumed command. Issuing clear and concise orders, disregarding heavy enemy machine gun and rifle fire, he began to move inland through the rice paddies without cover. The men, inspired by his cool demeanor and heroic example, rose from their positions and followed him. During the advance, Captain Wai repeatedly determined the locations of enemy strongpoints by deliberately exposing himself to draw their fire. In leading an assault upon the last remaining Japanese pillbox in the area, he was killed by its occupants. Captain Wai's courageous and aggressive leadership inspired the men, even after his death, to advance and destroy the enemy. His intrepid and determined efforts were largely responsible for the rapidity of which the initial beachhead was secured. Captain Wai's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon him, his unit, and the United States Army. Signed, William J. Clinton, President. Mahalo to the Wai family. We are honored for your presence in today's seminar, featuring the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Before we start our formal moderated discussion, we would like to thank our partners, East-West Center, Miss Hawaii U.S. International, Pearl Harbor Rotary Club, West Point Society of Hawaii, and most importantly, Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum for hosting us in this venue today. Additionally, we are joined virtually by author of Fire and Fortitude, the historian John C. McManus. John, we have you on screen right now. Say hello.
Yes, hello, how's it going? Crystal, thank you so much. I want to add my own special welcome to the Wai family. I was absolutely honored to write about him in a book I wrote called Island Infernos that covers the Leyte campaign. And I wanted to give you a little context for the campaign, but I also wanted to say, even before I do that, as long as we're talking about Captain Wai, I really think that he's a classic example of why we're all here today. I personally am really incredibly honored to be part of this Journey to Peace initiative, to be partnered with so many remarkable folks. I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment to what is, I think, an incredible cause. Captain Wai, of course, it's hard to even imagine the kind of life he would have had if not for war, and how promising a person he was on so many levels. He, of course, we've seen in the citation there about his athletic background and university background and all that. But I wanted to point out that on October 20, 1944, leading troops in combat as he did was not necessarily a big part of his job. He was an assistant intel officer, so this is something he did voluntarily because it had to be done, because he was extraordinarily courageous, and he understood what was needed in the moment. Well, even as he does this, he's partnering with a young private by the name of Hoffrichter, who is wielding a flamethrower, which of course is just an incredibly nasty weapon, but was necessary to take out the Japanese pillboxes that day. After each one that they attacked and took out, Hoffrichter threw up because he was so traumatized and revolted by what they were having to do, that he and Wai and the others just continued. And of course, as we know, this cost Wai his life ultimately. And I think, again, you just couldn't come up with a more poignant example of the tragedy of what happens in this war, in all wars, and how it affects the survivors and the families. So the larger context, of course, of the Leyte campaign begins with this, really the failure of peace. Obviously, in 1941, when the Japanese invade the archipelago, which had been an American colony at that stage. And so they had obviously taken Leyte along with some of the other islands that allows them to at least have some modicum of control over the archipelago. But when the Americans are defeated there in the Filipinos in 1942, there's of course a tremendous resolution to come back on the part of the commander, General MacArthur, who we all know very well, of course. So he famously says, "I shall return," and this is really the focus of what is called the Southwest Pacific area, the theater under his command. It's what he argues for in grand councils of strategy of war for the next couple of years. It's what everything is geared for in terms of his operations in New Guinea and beyond. And really the dilemma for the Americans as they're formulating their strategy as of mid-1944, when the war is really going their way, is that they're thinking, well, should we go back to the Philippines and think about, a major campaign, which is what's going to be necessary in order to liberate the islands, or are we going to go to Formosa, which of course is today's Taiwan and was a Japanese colony at that point in time. And just as a general overview, the Navy tended to favor the latter, and of course MacArthur and to some extent the Army favors the idea of coming back to the Philippines. We ultimately, by late summer, discard the idea of invading at Formosa as just simply too big a gulp, too difficult in terms of logistics especially. And so MacArthur is more or less going to get his way to have operations in the Philippines. And he's going to begin that, of course, with the invasion of Leyte on October 20th. Why Leyte? Well, he sees it as like the sort of, you can think of it as like the abdomen, on a kind of, if you're thinking of a human body, it's the abdomen in a sense, it's the middle. And so he figures he can cut the archipelago in two by taking Leyte and developing as a base to move both north and south on either side of this kind of body in that.
Hey, John Hanson here. I'm sorry, sir. We're going to blow into a lot of this in a minute or two. And although I'm loath to cut this off because it was spectacular, we're going to circle back on that, if we could, as we get going in the panel discussions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Just a few more introductions before we get started. We have a message from one of our JPI board members and Miss Hawaii U.S. International 2024, Melody Higa, who is currently in Tokyo, Japan, competing in Miss International 2024.
Aloha, my name is Melody Higa, Miss International Hawaii 2024. Japanese tea, with its deep cultural roots and serene rituals, embodies a profound connection to peace and mindfulness. Dr. Sen of the University of Hawaii is a world-renowned tea master who often spoke of peace through a cup of tea. He reminds us that through exploring the relationship between Japanese tea and peace, we uncover a timeless tradition that invites us to reflect, connect, and find solace in the simple act of sharing a cup. In a world often marked by division and unrest, the importance of peace cannot be overstated. It enables dialogue, understanding, and collaboration among diverse groups. The sacrifices from the results of war and violence manifest in various forms, affecting individuals, families, communities, and entire nations. Meeting with general consulates has played a crucial role in promoting peace and fostering diplomatic relations between nations. Here are some key points highlighting their importance. We allow an environment that fosters diplomatic dialogue, cultural exchange, conflict resolution, and economic cooperation. Along with meeting world leaders, I have joined the Journey to Peace initiative as a board member to promote the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 16. Journey to Peace is an ongoing multi-generational fellowship aimed at developing young leaders to cultivate peaceful connections that cross national borders. The Journey to Peace initiative centers around a series of presentations that bring experts and the public together to discuss critical dimensions behind global conflicts and how we can maintain a meaningful living memory to avoid future atrocities. Commemorative events, storytelling, and shared memories can help serve as a powerful reminder of the ongoing need for dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation in our world. Journey to Peace has created a series of events open to the public that reaffirm our dedication to promoting peace and preventing future conflicts. Each of us has a role to play in creating a world where the sacrifices of our heroes are honored not just through memory, but through action and collaboration.
All right, up next, we have one of our JPI board members giving our newcomers an overview of our vision. Sani Hakini is an Air Force intelligence analyst who, prior to enlisting, served as a director of communications for State Ethics Commission in New Mexico. Please welcome Sani.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. So my name is Sani Christopher Hakani. I'm an intelligence analyst and somebody who's a student of history, and as far as my role with JPI, I'm kind of like the program advisor. And our entire goal is to develop a platform that can do a couple of things. The two pieces primarily are, one, create a platform where we can remember some of these critically important moments in history that, you know, as the saying goes, those who don't remember history don't learn the lessons of history, are doomed to repeat them. So the entire premise of this first kind of half of JPI is really just to take a moment, create a platform where we can remember some of these critical moments in history and dive into the details. And then the second piece is to create a platform that can foster connection between future leaders, especially those who are interested in policy, diplomacy, international relations, or defense, because it's precisely those lessons that are shared by people who have enough trust and common understanding that fosters the type of decision-making and the type of relationships between nations that allows peace to maintain its trajectory. So future iterations of JPI will look a lot like a fellowship. It will take us to other historically critical places, and it will involve in integrating and inviting other nations' youth and future leaders to be a part of this program to ensure that we're providing that platform for future leaders to interface with each other, so that in the future, in critical decisive moments, folks can remember that we're not so different from each other. We all share that same short moment of life, and that we've all internalized some of these critical historical lessons and share that same appreciation for the preciousness of life and the fragility of stability in international relations. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Crystal.
Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, I have the honor of introducing our wonderful moderator, Karen Knutson. Her resume is very impressive. Adjunct Senior Fellow at the East-West Center, serves on the Board of Directors for American Red Cross Pacific Island Regions, and Chair of the Board of Directors for Japan America Society. Please give a warm aloha to Karen.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Thank you, Sunny, for that overview. Thank you, John, for the prelude to what we're going to get into, and we'll be calling on you in just a few minutes again. This is such an important initiative, and I really applaud the men and women who have been working on this for so long, so diligently. The Journey to Peace initiative, as you heard from Sunny, strives to provide information and an understanding of the key events that led to the Second World War, with a focus on the Pacific, and warning signs that reemerge in similar patterns, that have emerged in similar patterns throughout history. Using that knowledge, using that understanding, hearing from historians and military and diplomats, we want to have that, hopefully, thwart future aggression and war. That's what we're striving to do, and through the connections, as Sunny has mentioned. Today's seminar focuses on the upcoming 80th anniversary of World War II's Philippines campaign, which began with the Battle of the Gulf of Leyte. Some of the fiercest fighting of U.S. involvement in World War II took place in the Philippines. There was a staggering loss of life on all sides. I want to read a couple of quotes that sets the stage for today's event. And John already mentioned General MacArthur saying, "I shall return." I have a quote from when he did return. "People of the Philippines, I have returned. Our forces stand again on Philippine soil, consecrated in the blood of our two peoples. At my side is your president. The seat of your government is now firmly reestablished." General MacArthur said this on October 20th, 1944, landing beaches in Leyte, the Philippines. Second quote is, "A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." And this is from Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland on October 5th, 1944. He was captain of the destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, MOH posthumous. Today's program focuses on what happened that led to the Battle of Leyte. What was the rationale to wage battle in the Philippines rather than another strategic location, as John started to mention? Who were the major players on both sides, in addition to the United States and Japan? We had allies with us. We want to consider the interconnected factors and lessons behind the Battle of Leyte and how we can maintain a meaningful living memory to avoid future atrocities. Our panelists will provide overviews and remarks from their respective backgrounds and professions. We have historian, academic, military, and diplomatic. After their presentations, I'll pose several rhetorical questions to the panelists, and then we want the audience participation. We want your questions, because very seldom you get a group like this together and have this opportunity to ask questions. Audience members can submit questions. Oh, we'll do this later, right? When we put this, okay, we'll do this later, okay. We're privileged to have an impressive panel of 4 experts who, in addition to providing factual information, will also provide context and background about how and why some of these decisions were made, drawing upon their own expertise and experience. I'll introduce the panelists alphabetically. Join us online. You saw John McManus. He's an award-winning professor, author, and military historian. Professor McManus holds the position of Curator's Distinguished Professor of U.S. Military History at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, Missouri S&T, and is one of the nation's leading military historians. He has written 15 acclaimed books, including the trilogy, Fire and Fortitude, the U.S. Army in the Pacific War, 1941 to 1943, Islands Infernos, the U.S. Army's Pacific War Odyssey, 1944, and To the End of the Earth, the U.S. Army and the Downfall of Japan, 1945. In addition to writing his books, he's known for speaking to media, accepting speaking engagements around the country, and, like this program, he also carries a full teaching load at Missouri S&T, which is why he's not with us today. I think he is grading papers. He has a commitment to his students. Next, we have Ambassador Jim Moriarty, who served as U.S. Ambassador to Bangladesh from 2008 to 2011. Jim? And thank you, Elsa. Elsa's the young girl giving out lane. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Prior to serving as ambassador to Bangladesh and Nepal, he was a special assistant to the U.S. President and Senior Director for Asia at the National Security Council from 2002 to 2004. In his role at the NSC, he advised the President and coordinated U.S. policy on East Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and South Asia. Previously, he served as Director for China Affairs at the National Security Council in 2001 and was head of the political sections at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing from 1998 to 2001, and at the American Institute of Taiwan from 1995 to 98. There is no U.S. Embassy in Taiwan, but the AIT serves in that same purpose. In 2016, he was tapped to serve as AIT chair and served in that capacity until 2023, which means he advises here, and you can go into that a little bit more, Jim, if you'd like, but right. But anyway, thank you. Next we have Captain Carl, or Carlos, as we affectionately call him, he's known, Schuster. He is a senior military and geopolitical analyst who has provided security and threat assessment to commercial and government officials. He is a founding director of PACOM and Corporate Open Source Exploitation Centers. And I do want to know more about that, Carlos. Dr. Schuster has been a guest lecturer at the Naval War College and directed the Intelligence Center's collection, analysis, production, and support at the U.S. Pacific Command, and was deputy co-chairman of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe-Balkan Crisis Planning Team, and served in the U.S. Navy in Okinawa as an assistant chief of staff of intelligence. Captain Schuster recently retired from his academic career as a professor at Hawaii Pacific University. And Lieutenant General Frank Wiercinski had a 34-year career in the U.S. Army, serving in multiple posts, including as commander of the United States Army Pacific, USARPAC, previously serving as deputy commanding officer there. He was also a commanding general of U.S. Army Japan and I Corps Forward. General Wiercinski served as one of the first combat brigade commanders to enter Afghanistan after 9/11. During Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan, then, as he was, Colonel Wiercinski was commander of the 187th Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, he was deputy commander for the support of the multinational division North in Iraq. The troops under his command were responsible for a large part of Iraq, stretching from Baghdad to the Turkish border and east and west to the borders of Iran and Syria. Upon retirement, he joined Cubic Global Defense before joining Raytheon in 2020 as their vice president for missile defense requirements and capabilities. Boiling down the resumes of these accomplished gentlemen was really tough, but what an impressive resume and group of experts we have. So I'd like to go back to John McManus to share his thoughts on why the Philippines set the stage for the rest of the discussion. So John, we're sorry we broke you off in the middle of that, but can you please continue for a few minutes? And we do have a kind of a hard stop, if we go on a little too long, please forgive me for interrupting and saying we must go on.
Absolutely, no problem. And my apologies for jumping the gun there. And I'll just wrap it up here in a couple of minutes. But as I mentioned, the decisions made by late summer 1944 to liberate the Philippines, MacArthur sees Leyte as the best place to take that first step. What he hopes to get out of it is to develop a major base from which he's going to move operations northward to Luzon and elsewhere in the archipelago. And he really sees the control of the Philippines as a way to defeat Japan strategically in relation to cutting off its access to the resources that it captured in what is today Indonesia, cutting off those sea lanes between the Philippines, or between Indonesia and Japan. And so I just want to point out that maybe a little bit of the larger context for both sides in this thing. From the Japanese point of view, of course, they've been on the back foot for a couple of years, with the Americans really gaining momentum in the war. Now they are still looking for a major showdown naval engagement, and of course that's what's going to become the Battle of Leyte Gulf. But I think it's important to remember too that Leyte is an air, land, and sea battle in which both sides are going to pour in a lot of resources and a kind of escalation side to it. From a land perspective, in terms of the combat forces arrayed, we we are going to contribute more ground combat power to the invasion of Leyte than we did to the invasion of Normandy. So it gives you a little sense of the larger context there. It's a massive effort, and you can imagine the kind of sea power you need in order to transport all those ground troops. It's enormous, absolutely enormous. The Japanese had felt that they could launch an aerial counterattack that would neutralize this American invasion. So they're attempting to do that, and it's at Leyte for the first time that we see the use of kamikazes. It's later in the battle, in December 1944. So again, it's just this air, land, and sea dimension to the battle, and the battle is actually really incredibly tragic because neither side gets what it wants out of it. The Japanese expend major resources they can never recover, losing, of course, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, but frittering away their air power, and they're going to infiltrate in about 8+ divisions of ground combat troops in the course of the battle, and they're going to lose most of these people. And then again, that's another side of the tragedy of this. On the American side, you're going to be investing enormous amounts of combat power and not really getting the bases you want out of it because it's very difficult to build air bases on Leyte that will support bomber operations. The weather is absolutely terrible and the infrastructure is challenging. And the last thing I want to point out is the humanitarian operation. Once you've invaded now in a friendly country that you're liberating, you're destroying things, you're uprooting people, and of course the Filipinos are a huge part of this campaign. So the Americans are having to take care of the population. You're going to see that, of course, continue throughout the entire Philippines campaign, just as it was going on in Europe. And so it's really important to understand, in my opinion, the Filipinos are really, front and center in terms of winning their own liberation because they're fighting as guerrilla fighters, they're working as guides with the Americans, they're helping any way they possibly can. So hopefully that sets the stage a little bit. I'm going to conclude my remarks there, just to give you a little sort of larger military context, I guess.
Thank you, John. We'll be coming back to you. Thank you very much for that. Next, I'd like to move on to Carlos, because now you can focus a little bit down into the actual battle of Leyte, and then we'll go to General Wiercinski.
Thank you, Karen. Most people that look at the Battle of Leyte Gulf focus on what we call the Battle off Samar Island. In fact, Leyte Gulf is 4 naval engagements that encompass a geographic area larger than the Mediterranean Sea. So the geographic expanse is the largest of any naval battle in history. Also, 200,000 sailors and other military personnel involved. So the number of ships, the number of personnel, all were on a grand scale. So the battle actually starts on the 23rd of October, and it runs to the 26th. And if I could have slide 7 up. It is, right behind me. The first engagement was known as the Battle of the Suguan Sea. And you'll see it up here with the number 1 under the star. It was an air versus ship engagement. Task Group 38.2 was conducting airstrikes against the Japanese naval air bases on Luzon. And Admiral Onisha launched a counterattack with the 1st Air Fleet. He launched about 120 aircraft, which is almost all he had. They sank 1 light aircraft carrier, the Princeton, and they sank the battleship Musashi. Vice Admiral Kurita, who commanded the central force, turned around and left the area just before sundown. Admiral Halsey declared victory. But what Halsey didn't notice is once the sun went down, Kurita turned around and started heading back up the San Bernardino Strait. There were 3 intelligence reports or reconnaissance reports to Halsey during the night that Kurita was returning to the San Bernardino Straits, but he was so convinced he had won that the first one to report it, he was verbally eviscerated and sent to his stateroom. The next 2 reports were received by his staff, and they dared not go to Halsey with him. As a result, Kurita achieved tactical surprise in the 3rd battle, the Battle of Samar. Now, the 2nd battle, the Battle of Surigao Strait, is the last battleship-on-battleship battle in naval history. The Southern force, under Vice Admiral Nishima, was
coming up through the Surigao Straits. He was outnumbered. He only had 2 battleships. His job was to break through, get to the transports, and sink them. However, Rear Admiral Oldendorf had 6 battleships, 5 of which had been restored after Pearl Harbor. The only battleship present on the U.S. side that was not at Pearl Harbor was the USS Mississippi. So he walked in, essentially steamed into an ambush. Oldendorf had set up a gauntlet of PT boats, destroyers, then cruisers, then battleships. So the Japanese were whittled down by the time they came into a gunnery engagement. The other thing was they were steaming into a line of battleships, so what's known as crossing the T. The American ships could focus their entire salvos and broadsides onto the Japanese, and they could only fire their forward guns. The result is 1 battleship lost, several cruisers damaged, so Nishima turned around and left. He fled. Now, Halsey sent indications of his plans, but he was very parochial. He only sent them to Nimitz and King. He did not share it with Kincaid, who was commanding the force supporting the Army landing. Kincaid, however, didn't trust Halsey, so he was monitoring Halsey's broadcast. Halsey sent out a message saying he was forming Task Force 34 to protect the landing force. But what he didn't tell Nimitz or anyone was that was a contingency. He wasn't actually going to form it. So Kincaid's thinking his forces have protection. They don't. So when Kurita comes out of the San Bernardino Straits, he surprises Task Unit 22.3.2, which was a bunch of escort carriers. They only carried about 20 planes each, and their protection consisted of 4 destroyers and destroyer escorts. Now, a destroyer has a 5-inch gun, no armor. Battleships, 14 and 18-inch guns, lots of armor. Lieutenant Commander Evans on the Johnston, without awaiting orders, charged into the Japanese battle line. My father was on the Johnston. The Samuel Roberts, under Culbertson, also turned into the battle line, and he announced to his crew that they probably would not survive. And indeed, very few of them did. On the Johnston, 167 of a 260-man crew died. Now, Kurita was stunned by the shock of the response. The American planes were not equipped to engage ships. They were carrying light bombs to attack troops, and they had depth charges to attack submarines. They took off with what they could and attacked. Couldn't do much damage, but they impressed Kurita with their attacks. Over 400 sorties in 2 hours. Even the carriers, which only had 1 gun each, fired at the Japanese and then retreated into a rain squall. In the middle of all that, Kurita gets an intel report saying there is a carrier task group to his north. And he's thinking with all these planes, that must be true. So he turns to engage that carrier task group at close range. Forgot all about going after the transports. And then when he didn't encounter the carriers, he fled back up the San Bernardino Straits rather than be caught by airstrikes before the sun went down. So he did a lot of damage, sank a destroyer escort, and sank the Gambia Bay. But overall, no effect on the landing. That set the stage for the 4th engagement up in the far north, Battle of the Bay of Engaiso, which is a Spanish word that means deception. Ozawa's deception group was finally discovered, and Halsey never formed Group Task Force 34. He took the entire group and sent the entire 3rd Fleet steam north. But because he'd been running the fleet back and forth, the destroyers ran out of fuel, so he had to stop and refuel them. So he didn't catch Ozawa's group until the 26th. And they only had 108 planes. Most of the pilots were fresh out of training school, inexperienced. So it was the naval equivalent to a massacre. So from an operational perspective, the Americans can claim they won because we controlled the sea space and airspace when it was over. The landing force was saved. And I just want to close with one statement. Everyone talks about Leyte Gulf as an American engagement. It was predominantly. However, an Australian Commodore was wounded by the first kamikaze attack, which was conducted against the landing force on the 24th while the Battle of Samar was going on. And he was damaged by shrapnel as they attacked his flagship. So Commodore Collins was the most senior naval officer wounded at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. He was commanding the naval gunfire support elements supporting the Army. So that's the battle in a short, shall we say, capsule. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Schuster. I'm sorry to be tired. I think I would have liked to attend your class. Thank you. And, yeah, right. And I'm sorry for this. I thought I would be able to keep track here, but unfortunately, I hit the stopwatch. Anyway, Ambassador Moriarty, if you could give from a diplomatic point of view, and I'm going to end with General Wiercinski, who actually was on the ground fighting, not in World War II, but we'll hear from him. Okay, Jim.
Can anybody hear me now? How about in back? Raise your hand. Yes, everybody can hear me. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about this U.S.-Filipino relationship and why the heck were we actually out there doing this at the time. We started our relationship with the Philippines because we wanted to liberate Cuba. That's what it boils down to. The Spanish-American War was, if any of you folks remember the Maine, it was fought because of the slogan, "Remember the Maine." Sentiment in the U.S. had been growing against Spanish brutalities in Cuba. Long story short, we defeat the Spanish both in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. In the Pacific, that meant a number of places, but by far most importantly, the Philippine Islands. We took over the Philippine Islands despite having worked with Philippine rebels. 3 years before the Spanish-American War, there had been an ongoing battle between the Spanish and Filipino rebels who wanted a democratic nation. We came in, we helped the rebels to some degree, but then at the subsequent treaty with the Spanish, we took over the Philippines. It was a funny move, and it wasn't tremendously popular. The president at the time, McKinley, had it forced upon him, but basically there was so much public outcry that he didn't have much choice. He appointed somebody who later became the only U.S. president to have served on the Supreme Court and been the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and also the Governor General of the Philippines, William Howard Taft. Taft looked at this and said, wait a sec, listen, we're not going to be a long-term colonizer. That's against our ethos. And already tremendous pressure was building up in the U.S. about what are we doing? We fought a war to help liberate Cuba, and now we're taking over the Philippines. So he took on a policy of attraction, as he called it, to sort of say, okay, we're going to try and make the lives of the Filipinos better. That's how we're going to do it. There were countercurrents. There was a powerful voice saying, we are a trading nation. The United States is a trading nation. The 1890s were horrible for the U.S. economy. The frontier closed down. There was no more frontier. Where was the U.S. going to grow? Well, we had the best industry in the world. Where are we going to sell this stuff? The answer is we had to be able to export it. To export it, we needed to have freedom of the seas. And freedom of the seas in the late 1800s meant that you had to refuel. You had to have coaling bases. Kind of like what happened here in Hawaii, where Hawaii was annexed largely because it looked like an attractive piece of land to have property to be able to refuel our navies. So anyhow, we took over, but by 2000, by 1906, we're already saying, we want to move towards independence. A few years later, we pass a law saying that we're going to move towards full independence quickly. By 1934, we signed a law doing two things. We signed a law saying full independence by 1944 for the Philippines, And we're going to give them immediate Commonwealth status, where they became self-governing entirely, with the U.S., and this is very important to the longer story here, responsible for the foreign affairs of the Commonwealth of the Philippines and also the defense of the Philippines. And long story short, that justified us building up military bases and having a serious presence there. Of course, what happened for the aficionados here, 10 hours after Pearl Harbor was attacked, the U.S. bases in the Philippines were attacked by the Japanese. Brutal fighting ensued. We had the death march to Bataan. We had a lot of atrocities being committed. And ultimately, this led to General MacArthur leaving from a little place called Corregidor on the peninsula to go into exile, saying, as Karen said earlier, that we will return. That connection with the Philippines still continues. We from 1951 until relatively recently, we had a formal alliance. We later signed a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, saying that we would help the Philippines and the Philippines would help us if either side was attacked by a third party. And that's why we continue to this day heavily involved in the defense of the Philippines. And it means a lot for East Asia right now. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ambassador General Wiercinski.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for being here today. We truly appreciate that. I am not a historian, but I am deeply grateful to the historians that we have here. I'm going to take a course because they apply the context. I'm not a statesman, and I appreciate Ambassador Moriarty being here as well. We've worked together on several points. What I am is a soldier. And what I bring here today is the cost, the real cost of what happens when nations go to war. Unfortunately, I've seen it in places like Panama, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The cost is human life. The cost is not only in the soldiers and leaders who are on the ground, like Captain Wai, but the families that are back, like the Wai family. We can talk about that, but I can tell you the cost is not just in the carnage, the blood and sweat and tears that people feel and see on the battlefield, but the cost is also when you return. You return without friends. You return to families changed and different, because I can tell you personally, no matter how strong you think you are, nobody comes back from that the same. That is a cost that those of us who have served and those who do serve and will serve in the future have voluntarily said we will pay to keep our nation free. You know, there's that old saying, the cost of freedom is not free. It's paid. It's paid for by the soldiers, it's paid for by the families for a long, long time. The heroics of the naval battle of Leyte are legendary. Largest naval fight in World War II, right?
Sir, and in history.
But it's the last 100 yards. The last 100 yards to the beach. The last 100 yards on the beach. The last 100 yards to the objective that you see a cost. Close up and very, very personal. I'm honored to be able to be here today because of the peace initiative. Because of everyone in our country who doesn't want war, I can guarantee you, your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are the first to stand up and say, we don't want to go to war. But I thank God that we still have men and women in our country who are willing to stand up and say, I will stand on that wall for you. Just realize that there is a cost to that. And it continues not only during war, but well beyond it. People always ask, what can we do? How can we help? What can we do? And I'm pretty simple about this. Teach your children history. Teach your children about the Constitution of the United States of America. Teach your children about the price that was paid to keep that secure and to keep that free. That's what you can do for us. And you can help us by putting people in senior positions who also understand the cost of that and do everything they can to keep us from that through great negotiation, through statesmanship, through diplomatic means, through economic means, first, before employing the military. And I'll just end by saying that once all of those fail, you have an incredible military that will do what you ask them to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the panelists. Before I ask any questions, do any of you, would you like to comment on one of the other panelists? Or John, I hope you're still with us? He said, okay, John, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to ask of your fellow panelists?
No, nothing in particular, except just to voice my 100% agreement with
Yeah.
everything they said.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Ambassador? Yeah. Oh, no, who said it?
I just want to say I'm terribly moved by what my fellow panelists have said.
Thank you, and I think that knowing the history is so important. If we bring it up to the current day, I'm going to ask each of you just your thoughts, looking at what's happening in the region today. We call them malign actors, and we can name names if we want, but there are certain things happening in the region. What do you feel? Are we on the right path in terms of working diplomatically, with providing economic assistance to our allies and friends? Can you give us a little bit of your thoughts, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of optimism with this? John, I'll start with you.
Well, I actually think my fellow panelists are better suited to answer that. But I do think one good development has been the United States and the Philippines growing closer in the last year and a half or so. I think that's been I know there's a lot of baggage there in terms of Philippines being a U.S. colony and the Philippine-American War and whatever else. But I do think that in general, they've proven to be good partners. They've gotten a lot from each other, and there's very close ties of kinship between the two peoples that goes back a long way now. I think we are natural allies, natural friends, natural partners, just on a human level. But obviously the geopolitics make great sense too. So from my point of view, just as an historian, I think that's been a positive development.
Thank you. I think here in Hawaii, because we have such a large Filipino population, it is such a close relationship. So I think we see this and feel this probably more deeply than a lot of the other states. So, yeah, Professor Schuster, is there anything after hearing your fellow panelists?
I think I agree with everything that's been said, and I'll operate this thing. Oh, what? Oh, good. Key thing to remember when you look at history is it never repeats exactly, but it does rhyme, if I may quote someone. apply the lessons and give some thought. Today's circumstances share some similarities to the past, but they also differ greatly. One of the things about the going into the Philippines that often doesn't get discussed is we had promised them independence, and MacArthur argued that if we bypass them and go to Formosa, what does that say to the 100 and something thousand Filipinos who died fighting for what they thought was their freedom? They were fighting for their independence. We promised it to them. If we abandon them, we don't deliver. That will have long-term political consequences. One of the things, too, I can tell you from studying European records, they were worried about the way we were running the Philippines because European colonies didn't promise any of theirs independence. They had to fight for it after World War II. And the British, in particular, were looking at how we ruled the Philippines and thought they're setting a bad example, which I thought was kind of an ironic statement. But the key thing is, as we prepare for mutual defense and as we argue for it, remember, ours is not the only point of view. They have their interests, their concerns, and we need to accommodate them as we convince them to work with us. And that's the only additional comment I can make, really. Thank you.
Ambassador Moriarty.
Well, I guess I'm going to say the big C word, okay? China is different from Japan in a lot of ways. Some of the ways are actually a lot scarier. One of them is the sheer magnitude of the Chinese economy. I said earlier about how we were looking for markets to export to. The benign interpretation of what China looks at is comparable. You know, they want to be able to have a voice in global affairs. They want to be able to have a powerful economy that drives much of the global economy. This is what we wanted at the beginning of the 20th century and achieved. Unfortunately, there are other differences from Japan that are less promising. You know, in a way, we got into this a little bit last time around, but basically World War II did not occur, or at least Japanese advances that ultimately caused Japanese entry into World War II resulted from a very unusual Japanese history in that there was a history well respected of the under folks, and I do mean in this sense the samurai under folks, not the common person, but the samurai had the historical precedent and the historical right on their side to try and overthrow the top leaders and to follow policies that did not follow what the top leaders want. The top leaders didn't want the advance into China in the 1930s. Unfortunately, the Chinese leadership today is exactly the opposite. Very hierarchical, top-down. You now have, in contrast to what used to be a collective system of leadership, one-man rule. And in any country with one man or one woman rule, over time that leader surrounds him or herself with folks whose specialty is guessing what the leader wants to hear and being as brutal as necessary to curry favor with that leader. So that's pretty scary to me, particularly when you've now shifted to a leader who wants a, quote, rejuvenation of China that includes being the dominant voice in global affairs. Something I've worked a lot on, of course, is Taiwan. Taiwan has shifted from being an issue that could be kicked down the road under basically the current leader, Xi Jinping's three predecessors. They had no urgency about taking over Taiwan. They just wanted to prevent Taiwan independence. Current leader wants it. It's an important part of his legacy. He makes that very clear. He says he will not kick that issue down to the next generation of leaders. Now, getting back to the Philippines, with no historical basis except fishermen, 500 years ago, China has claimed much of the sea around the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, large parts of what should be Indonesia's. A tribunal declared those claims had no basis And now the Chinese actively implement those claims through use of force. This gets back to the Philippines immediately because the Philippines have set up shop in very humble fashion. They have on several of the contested areas that, in effect, this tribunal said really are Filipino, but where the Chinese say it's ours. The Chinese will start building bases. In response, the Filipinos have put a decrepit old ship on top of one of those, and they have to resupply it. And the Chinese have engaged in very dangerous actions to prevent it. At one point, they blasted water cannons out of a Filipino ship with Filipino sailors on it. If they had killed any of those sailors, it would have forced us to do something. It would have been an attack on a Philippines Navy vessel. We would have to respond. Similarly, up in my beloved Taiwan Strait, you have the Chinese Air Force loosing flak, little pieces of aluminum to get caught in the jet engines, not of ours directly, but of our Australian allies and our Canadian allies too. So the situation is getting very dangerous. One of the big parallels we have here is, the failure to communicate, to quote from Cool Hand Luke. Again, a big contributing factor to World War II was the failure to communicate, the failure to negotiate. Unfortunately, we have a pattern, and I was here for both these incidents, of the Chinese leadership ignoring the U.S. leadership in times of crisis. This happened after we bombed their embassy in Belgrade by mistake, genuinely by mistake. And then it happened again after the EP-3 incident, where a Chinese aircraft collided with our aircraft, leading to loss of life on the Chinese side. But again, I'm not optimistic that next time around the Chinese leader is going to pick up the phone. So the question is, how do we build up more and more varying lines of communication? How do we make our intent serious? How do we make them seriously understand that, look, we have a treaty obligation to the Philippines, and we would have to do something about it. We have a Taiwan Relations Act that does get us involved if there's a blockade of Taiwan. So anyhow, I'll leave my comments there. I'll pass it to anybody else.
Just before, General Wiercinski, I'm going to add on to the question to you. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer. I spent 30 years also at the East-West Center, working at bringing people together for dialogue, often from competing countries around the region. And we do have APCSS, where they bring military folks. Now, my understanding is, of course, PLA cannot come. So, in addition to commenting in the broader question, how do you feel about cutting off any dialogue with the PLA? But I just want to say, and even retired PLA, because they could come up to the East-West Center and we could have dialogue with them, but they can't go to APCSS. So.
Well, thank you. I could not agree with Ambassador Moriarty more, and I am not afraid to say the China word. It is a far, far more dangerous world today than it was 20 years ago in the Pacific. You do not have the type of buildup, military buildup, like China is doing right now for defense of your nation. The only reason to have that size of a military is for offensive action. We've talked about talking, negotiation, open communication, and deterrence. Deterrence is a major factor in halting aggression, halting war. And how do you achieve deterrence? What is deterrence? Well, first of all, deterrence is not what you think it is. Deterrence is what your enemy thinks it is. When you say, well, I think we've got enough deterrence. I think we've got enough ships there, and we've got this, and we've got that. And when your enemy is laughing at you, you don't have deterrence. You have targets. Deterrence is incredibly important. And the United States alone is not going to deter China. It takes a village, a big one. It takes Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, India, East and Southeast Asia, to send a message that says, we do not want to fight, but we are not going to back down, and we are going to be here, and it's not going to be a walk in the park should you choose to do something irrational. I think that's very, very important. And when we talk about establishing defensive measures in islands in the Pacific, one thing I've realized is the Pacific is a very big place, and you need to cover it. And again, you need your friends. Now, about APCSS, I would always welcome all voices, because if you're not listening and you're not talking, you're probably not getting the right information. And I'm a full supporter of that. I think it's incredibly important to do that. Pancho Villa and General Pershing talked in Austin, Texas, during that war. And it's very, very important to have dialogue. I am not a politician. I am not on the civilian side of making policy or determining policy, but I have been on the execution side of it, of when those people make the decisions. And I think we need to make sure that all avenues are always open to deter, to communicate, and to make sure that we are seeing each other eye to eye and answering the questions.
All right, Carlos, quickly, because we're going to move to questions.
Yeah, if I can just build on that for a second, a historical point. Roosevelt thought that moving the fleet to Hawaii was a deterrent move. That was not the way the Japanese General Staff interpreted it. They saw the fleets now within range and we could hit it. And so we thought we were deterring them, when in fact we were providing them a solution to what they saw as a strategic problem. The second thing is, one of the reasons you need to understand history is because your enemy tends to distort it. I'm not going to bore you with Germany's distortions of history in World War II, but I will tell you what China's doing. They signed a border agreement with Bhutan. They violated it almost immediately. They denied they were violating it, and then when they were caught by commercial imagery, they pulled out a group of scholars who said that area we're occupying has always been part of China, and they said Tibetan shepherds used to go through there. Well, my problem with that is Tibet was an independent kingdom when those shepherds went through there, and China conquered Tibet. India got a border patrol agreement by saying, if there's another engagement, we intend to win it, and they started moving troops and artillery up there. Suddenly, China is very accommodating. Yeah, we're going to be very, very, we hear you. So it's not just words. Sometimes it's acts. And one of the things that the Chinese have traditionally done, dating back to their ancient history, is they give their opponent a series of tests. And the reaction to those tests is how they discern your intentions and at what point do we know we've gone too far. And so what we're undergoing through right now is a series of tests. The other thing they do that I think is very important to keep in mind is their traditional military strategy has always had a political element to it, dating back to around 1400 BCE. And that is, if I can create chaos in the enemy's capital, then they will not unite in the war against me. So be aware of their misinformation, their misapplication of history, as the ambassador pointed out in South China Sea. Also, China's unhappy with Japan now, and shock, surprise, a group of Beijing University professors found out that Okinawa and the Ryukyus have always been a part of China. And Putin's largely sold Russia's soul to China because a group of Beijing scholars just 2 months ago discovered that Eastern Russia has always been a part of China. And
Thank you, Carla.
so, anyway, if I can close on that, so remember, they don't only have to know your history, you need to know theirs.
Well, that's, and I attended a lecture, I was at an event yesterday with Lucas Filler, a top China scholar at APCSS, and he showed maps of China, and they've had varying borders, depending on the empire and dynasty, it's been all over the place, so there's no traditional border. That was very interesting. But I'd like to open this to questions, and Sunny is going to tell us a high-tech way we can do this, and obviously, I can't even turn off my alarms, so good luck on me. And, but also, I think we can also run a microphone around as well.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have folks on the sides. We'll have the Boy Scouts here who are ready. If you just motion to one of them, they'll bring you a wireless mic. But if you all scan this QR code, if you have any trouble with that, we can also kind of hand it to you a bit more directly. It'll take you to a program called Slido. You can click the Q&A portion. Then you can just type your question in, and Karen will see it right over here. In fact, we'll see it. So I think this is one of the most incredibly important parts of the program, simply because, as my father always used to say, questions are like keys. If you shape it the right way, the insight, the right answer, it just unlocks immediately. And that's the kind of insight that we want to be able to elucidate, especially if we have the collective experience and perspective with the panel. So with that, I'll hand this over. If folks have things that they want to ask specifically, feel free to type it out or go ahead and ask. I think there's one question already loaded in there.
Thank you, and I just want to check with our MC. Crystal, do we have a few minutes? I know we were supposed to stop at 2:30. Do we can go a little bit later, or are we still aiming for 2:30?
We're good for like another 30 minutes.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of time. Okay. Here's a question.
One moment, please. We have a gentleman already in the audience.
Oh,
You
great.
want to go first, Karen? That's fine.
No, please, sir.
Yeah.
I defer to you.
Thank you, first of all, to the panel. Wonderful presentation. I've been a big fan of General Wiercinski for years, as you know, when you first told me about your experience jumping out of airplanes at 200 feet. And I was having a bad day at that time in my life, and he put it in perspective that this is what these folks do for us. And I think your message today, the cost of war, is really something that we don't, cover enough of. It's an ugly side, but it is a side that we really need to be aware of, I think. And I'd like to ask you, if you had each of you, one question, one thing for the younger folks to be left with, because I think we've got young folks in here, and these are the folks who are going to make a difference. What would you want them to take away from today? Thank you.
Yeah, we should acknowledge the Boy Scouts here. What troop is this?
97.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, you're. Who would like to tackle the question?
I'll start.
Good.
First of all, to the Boy Scouts, truthful, courteous, kind, obedient troop, thrifty, clean, brave, reverent. Those things are pretty important. Pretty darn good foundation. And thank you for being a scout. I think it's incredibly important to do that. I would just say to, the young folks, you don't have to volunteer for our Army if that's not something that you want to do, or our military at all. But I will tell you this, that we had a president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Sometimes that's not really followed today very closely. But if you don't join the military, join the Peace Corps. Do something in a foreign country. We have PAC here in Hawaii, where students travel to other countries and get different perspectives and learn. And learn about your own country. Like I said earlier, know the Constitution. Know how we got the Constitution. Know the price that was paid for that. And that no matter how many problems we have in our country, it is still the beacon of light around the world for freedom, democracy, and a home. Please remember that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Moriarty. Yeah.
It's tough to follow that. But I will just emphasize that, look, everyone here is halfway to Asia already. The future of the world is going to be decided in the Pacific, in Asia. You should be part of that. You should be an important part of that. Whether you go into business, whether you go into academia, whether you go into the military, whether you go into diplomacy. The world is exciting, it's changing, it's dangerous. Please have enough guts and enough initiative to say, I'm going to be part of that. I'm going to, in whatever way I can, try to make sure that, in the words that I was going to quote later on, history does not repeat itself. That we can work intelligently with folks from the area to come up with solutions to mutual problems, to deter those who might have bad intentions in a way that is effective. So you're it, folks. I'm way beyond having an ability to shape things right now. You guys have the rest of your lives, and I hope they're going to be important, productive lives that you'll be able to look back at with satisfaction and say, I did my bit.
Professor Schuster.
The only thing I can add to that, because those were very valuable and inspirational, and that is communications means remove the hyperbole from what you say, but also from what you hear. If somebody's pounding a table and screaming about history, the odds are they're distorting it in some way or they're driving you to their purpose. Look for the facts, look for a rational approach to the problem, and then go with that. Be a contributor to the calm, respectful dialogue. When you start screaming, when you start yelling hyperbole, shields come down and they stop listening. Passion's great, but you don't unify by insulting people. So, listen as well as talk. Expand your circle. That's all I can add.
Thank you. Professor McManus.
Yeah, I mean, I think Professor Schuster said that very, very well. Try to form your ideas based on rationality and evidence and what you know and can confirm and what you explored yourself. Be skeptical in that sense. So I would say be curious about the world, about developing yourself, and I guess it won't surprise anyone for me to tell you that I think it's just absolutely crucially important that you know something about history. If you don't know anything about history, you're going to be a perpetual child, and you're going to be quite vulnerable in a way to others manipulating you who you either know more or know enough in order to distort it, as Professor Schuster just said. I really think that that's going to be foundational no matter what you're going to be doing with your life. I think it can add a lot to your value as a citizen and what you can contribute. I really think that that's something the foundation, no matter what you're going to be doing.
Thank you very much. I have a question here that I think probably will go to you, Ambassador Moriarty, but anybody can weigh in if they have thoughts. This is from Graham Matthews. When will the Chinese attack Taiwan? Will we defend Taiwan? Is the war in Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan an effort to draw the USA into a three-front war? From a diplomatic point of view.
That is a great question.
Gosh, I could go, yes, no. No, I don't believe that what you're seeing in Ukraine, well, Ukraine started out by itself. It was Putin going through with what he had wanted to do, what he had planned to do, thinking that he could get away with it at the time, and now the jury is still out. Similarly, I've not heard of any direct connections between what Putin is doing and what has happened in the Middle East. In the Middle East, it's a continuation of what had been happening. It's basically Iranian support for anti-Israel groups. It was nothing like what the attack on Ukraine was. It was sort of a furthering of basically using terror as means for strategic interests, which is, the largest scale thing I've ever seen like that. Killing over 1,000 civilians, kidnapping hundreds to use as hostages. Those are terrorist actions. Yet they were backed by a powerful Iranian state. And that's what you're seeing in the Middle East. Now you've got the Iranians and the Russians working closely together because they are facing a common enemy. Similarly, getting to my favorite part of the world, the Chinese, they've never been that keen on Russia. They do have historical claims. After Putin's invasion of Ukraine, they've gotten much, much closer. Gotten much closer basically because I think of Xi Jinping's vision for the future of the world, which is, I don't want to put it in slogans, but basically making it safe for autocrats to find their own space while China has the largest say in global affairs. In that sense, it makes perfect sense. That Russia wants to get its future by conquering Ukraine. The Chinese are okay with that as long as Russia feels a dependency on China to carry out its aims, and they have that now. And also with North Koreans. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to go there. That gets too complicated. With respect to a timetable for an invasion of Taiwan, I don't think one exists. I think that Xi Jinping does not yet believe he has the capability to pull it off. Again, I get back to my earlier point. It's one man's decision that will drive China to war. He has to believe that he can pull it off. I cannot read his mind. Nobody can. Anybody who tells you that they think what's going on in the leadership compound in China, which is called Zhongnanhai, asking for a lot of detail because I don't know anybody like that. What you do know, what you can conjecture, is that Xi has two overarching goals right now. One is his continued survival. The second is the continued survival of the party. And like I've said earlier, he seems to think that his continued survival and that of the party somehow ties into the conquest of Taiwan. But it's not urgent. And if we can build up the deterrence, we haven't even gotten into deterrence, as we've said, is partly military, but it's partly showing, as the professor was saying, that the world stands against this, or at least enough of the world that it would be very difficult to pull off. Part of it is economic disincentives. There's a study by a group called Rhodium that says the global economy would contract by $13 trillion if there was war against the Taiwan Strait. The countries most affected would be Taiwan, China, and the US, but even Europe would suffer over $1 trillion in economic loss if there was a war there. That strait is so important, the Taiwanese exports are so important, that you would have a global recession almost immediately. Play on that. Do what we can to make things, and this goes against every partisan group around right now, but if we're suspicious of free trade with China, does that necessarily wash over to countries that can work with us? Our defense industrial bases in this, we don't have enough capacity. We have good allies and friends who can help on that, including, frankly, Taiwan, which has one of the most advanced machine tool industries in the world. We've got to be exploring all of these aspects. Information, as we were saying earlier, we can't let the Chinese disinformation rule the global south, and that's what they're trying to do right now. They are trying to make themselves the spokesperson for countries like Brazil, Argentina, Indonesia. A lot of countries are very suspicious of that, and we have to figure out how we play on that. And part of that is showing that there is an alternative to the Chinese economy, and particularly now with the Chinese economy not doing well. If we could somehow find a way to get around our allergy, our current allergy right now, very broadly spread, towards free trade of any sort, and say what makes sense for us, what makes sense for our friends, and go down that path rather than, no, any trade that we don't have a surplus in is bad for America. It's not the case.
Thank you, and I won't push on the final part of that question, is will we defend Taiwan? I mean, we say we will, but will we?
Oh, well, here we go. I'm going to define it. I'm going to say, okay, a couple of things. The Taiwan Relations Act does say we have the duty to provide defensive weapons. It says any attempt by anybody in China to use force or coercion, including the use of blockades, to take over, to change the economic, political, social system in Taiwan would be a threat to the stability of the Western Pacific and would directly impact U.S. national interests and would require the President to consult with Congress. And that's what would happen. And so I will tell you that the President of the United States of America, under those conditions, would have an incredibly difficult decision to make.
Thank you so much. We have a young woman here. Thank you. Can you state your name? It would just be helpful. And you don't have to.
My name is Yo. I was born and raised in the Philippines. And on behalf of the Filipino people, we are eternally grateful for what the U.S. government has done for us, economically, militarily. I'm proud to say that I became a U.S. citizen, and I did it the right way. To be able to vote, but in current situations, we are very much aware that our freedom of speech has been suppressed. And it seems like there's an international conspiracy, a campaign for misinformation, and this is really trying so hard to brainwash a lot of people, and all nations are really divided, okay? And I would like to commend all of you for everything you've shared with us. Your accomplishments are highly commendable. And I would like to ask about your insights about the upcoming election, its criticality.
In which country?
This country,
Japan,
the United
tomorrow.
States, with regards to the way other countries receive us in the foreign affairs. What happened in Afghanistan really broke my heart. I'm very, very patriotic. I'm willing to take a bullet for this nation. What can we do to avoid what happened with regards to the withdrawal of troops in Afghanistan? We left behind our troops, their families, our friends, our allies, our tax-paid military assets were left behind in the hands of the enemies, aviation, fighter planes, Humvees, AR-15s. This should not happen again. So, in this upcoming election, please share your opinion with regards to the kind of leadership that the world would respect and will bring order at this global geopolitical landscape.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive. I was just handed a 5-minute warning. So panelists, we'll start with General Wiercinski.
Yeah, we're going to need about 3 weeks.
The election will be decided.
Yeah, and no, there are so many things that you brought up there that are so important. Thank you for sharing that. I truly appreciate that. You are quite astute, and you are paying attention to what is happening in the world. To everybody out there, look, I'm a military guy. By definition, I'm an independent. And we all serve in the military for the Commander-in-Chief. And whoever that is, no matter what we think, I'll just take you back to a story that my dad told me one time. when somebody came into his pharmacy and my father had the picture of the president up on the wall. I'm not going to tell you who that was or what party it was, but they said to my father, "But you're not that political party." And my father said, "No, I'm not. But that is the President of the United States of America." So my only thing to you is vote, okay? Whatever you vote for, you were given that freedom by people. We talked about this, okay? Who let you have that freedom. Vote whoever you want. Think hard, because many of the issues that were discussed matter a lot. And make your choice based on that. Don't make your choice based on misinformation, party, and that's just my opinion, and it's just one person's opinion. But the most important thing is that you vote, and you vote with your mind and your heart. And you vote for your country, okay?
Thank you very much. Jim, quickly.
I just want to quickly say that my answer to this is pretty similar to my answer before, which is, look, we don't know who's going to win the election. There will be a new Congress coming in. There will be a new administration by definition coming in. Engage, talk to them, tell them your opinions. You know, my son-in-law was in Afghanistan. He was shattered by the experience of the withdrawal. It's tough to do it while you're in the military, but as a common citizen, you can write your representative, you can write your senator, and say, look, I'm really worried about the way things are going. We don't want a repeat of this. Or just importantly, you know, we love what you're doing with the alliances in East Asia. It's really important. The Filipinos are great allies. We need to be there for them. Congress actually listens to you. They got to stand for election again. If they begin hearing from people that this is the way the country wants to go, I hope that a lot of people can make the argument for, and I not only am similarly totally apolitical, because that's what my career was, but I also believe in the power of compromise. And if people start screaming, and this is what the polls show, that we want the parties to meet together in the middle, rather than let either party's extreme run the agenda of the United States of America, because we're 330 million people, and we want the opinions of all to be reflected in key decisions.
Thank you.
The only thing I can add to that is the congressmen have many, shall we say, activities and entities trying to get their attention. If you don't write the congressman, you don't engage them, then a combination of the lobbyists, press pundits, and very passionate activist groups will be their source of information for everything. You've got to be the voice of rationality, and you've got to be the voice for what you think is best for the country. Because if you don't say it, and you don't get it to them, then it gets lost in the noise. They do respond to well-written, rational comments and recommendations and commentary. Be a voice. You got to compete with the other voices, or they dominate. So just something to think about.
Thank you. Professor McManus?
I really don't have much to add, except to say, as you vote, try to use your head rather than your emotions. I would say, politicians, especially this time of year, as you get this late in an election cycle, I think a lot of times try to motivate by some of our worst emotions, fear and hatred and resentment and these kinds of things that do tend to move people. So as you think through the candidates and the issues and whatnot, try to think along those lines and force yourself to vote on the basis of, as we've heard, of rationality, whatever you can confirm evidentiary wise, and what you think is as Lincoln called it, the better angels of our nature, on the nicer side of human nature, I suppose. So I don't know that that's very good advice, but I do think that it's something to at least bear in mind.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments, and I think you're right. They will listen to you. The congressmen, they do respond. And thank you for the questions, and we didn't get to the questions here except for one, but thank all of you. we will be here for a few minutes afterward. We look forward to seeing you again. It's been fantastic. Let's give them a great round of applause. Oh.
All right, so our next event will be next year, January 11th, 2025, Escalation to Darkness. Our panelists will dive into the darkest acts of World War II in the Pacific. More details to follow if you join the mailing list. Right now, we have a few Boy Scouts volunteering, handing out a gift for participating today. So we have a participation certificate signed by our advisors at Journey to Peace. And then we're also handing out a flyer that discusses our future events and like our vision and Journey to Peace. Disclaimer, because we have a lawyer on the Journey to Peace board, the opinions conveyed are those of the presenters alone and does not represent any entity or organization. And ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our event. But to close, I would like to welcome our JPI board member, a founder, if I could say, Mr. Gail Messler, who will convey special gratitude to our presenters and audience.
Well, you're really too kind, Crystal. Can you hear me in the back? Oh, great. Yeah, I'm not alone in this thing. Jared Melander and I really got this ball game started, and the reason for it was evidenced by these Boy Scouts and a young Girl Scout here. A girl within Scouts, Troop 797, a girl troop here at Hickam Air Force Base. Because we have kids, Jared and I thought about the future. And we thought, what have we ever done, that would preclude our children from looking back 50 years from now and saying, well, thanks a lot, Dad, you did nothing to make this a better world. So this is our effort to really make it a better world. And we are joined by about 14 or so other folks that I'm not going to try to name right now because I would tie it up and I couldn't possibly do it. And we've got some what you might call corporate sponsors that we need to thank. I'll just start out with the East-West Center, which is supporting us here. The Rotary Club of Pearl Harbor, we're honored to have the current president right here, Tina Downing. A past president, Steve Dyer, who's one of our board members, and the incoming president, Dennis Drake, who's going to be president beginning next year. We're very fortunate to have them with us. Also, the West Point Society of Hawaii. John Hanson is the current president and a board member of Journey to Peace. The Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. How could you not thank them for giving us this wonderful venue? Advertising, which we couldn't possibly pay for, because we're operating on a shoestring, duct tape, and chicken wire puts this thing together. Bill Show and Eric, who are not in the room right now, we want to give a special shout out to them. On that Journey to Peace team, some of our board members really need a special shout out. Crystal has done a magnificent job. You see her up here. And always been standing in for Melody, who's representing us in Japan right now in that Miss International competition, because this is her thing that makes her special for that competition. So she's carrying the word of what we're trying to do over to Japan, and she's doing it with style. Senior Airman Sunny Hakani is somewhere right here. We thank him. This is a flash in the pan. To make it memorialized, we need a great videographer. And that's Grant Yoshida, who's in the back, very low-key, who's really been tremendously helpful to us. How could I continue without thanking the Wai family for joining us? The Wai family represents a soldier, who, like thousands of others, didn't come back from the Philippines. And here at the panel, I don't know if it came clear to you, but young Carlos Schuster here, father was on the USS Johnston. He survived, and that's why Carl gets to be with us today. But more than half of his crew did not survive, including us. Wow, what a great group. We have a traditional gift that we give to our panelists. It's a Hawaiian hook. And once you've been a panelist, you get one, you don't get a second. So the new panelists on this iteration are young Carlos Schuster and General Frank Wiercinski. and I want to thank them specifically. Oh, Jim's already got one. One to a panelist. Karen's got one, and John up there in Missouri, he's got one too. And I'd be dead wrong if I didn't thank every one of you for being here with us. We hope that you'll join us for the next event, the succeeding events. Oh my goodness, they're going to get exciting. When we talk in March with folks from Tokyo in the audience about the firebombing of Tokyo, in one night, the United States Air Force, or the Army Air Corps, killed 100,000 people in one night. And then when we get to the summer and we talk about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this is just going to get more and more interesting. And it will continue after that. We're recognizing 80th anniversaries. We're not celebrating them, we're recognizing them, because our longer journey here is the journey to peace. That's what it's all about. Thank you all very much.